So in the second part of this series of redoing a room in my parents' house, I'm going to be tackling the brick wall. Now there was some masonry work to do in the house. Obviously, since the brick wall was covered with plaster, really didn't know the shape it was going to be in before doing it. So if this is something you want to tackle, I highly recommend educating yourself a little bit about brickwork, because potentially when you tear off that outer wall, there's going to be some Easter eggs, I guess so to say, that might not be something that your DIY skills could tackle. This video is how I fix the back room. I'm once again not putting the DIY tag on there because I'm not a professional mason. I had a little bit of repair work to do, but I've done some mason work before. I felt comfortable with the level of repair that was needed for that room. So my recommendation is not to go beyond your skill set in something like this, especially a structural part of your home. But the other kind of umbrella statement I want to make for this video, the brick especially, is that depending on when your house was made, and I had mentioned in the first video that this back room is actually an addition, so the brick wall I'm working on was the original exterior of the house, and the room that is back there is an addition. And that was also updated throughout the years. You can tell by the materials that they used in the room that it was updated probably in the 40s or the 50s. So what works for me in these videos might not work for you. If you have a different type of plaster on your walls, it might not come down the same way that it did for myself. If you have a different type of plaster on the brick, because you'll see the type of plaster that's on the brick in the video, removing it, the tools I use might not work for you. I know that can be annoying, but I just kind of want to mention that the tools I used work really well for me. There was a little bit of trial and error, but that's what got the job done for this job. But depending on when your home is built, you might want to do a little research and find out what's on your walls, what's on the ceiling, what's on the floor before tackling a project, because you could find yourself being in a situation where what needs to be done to get the room functional again is beyond your skill set. So as I said, you'll see in the video, this one's mostly, I believe, all brickwork and dealing with the brick. So as I said in the last video, the original plan was not to tackle any sort of brickwork. We knew that this was most likely there. I think the big concern was, since it was an exterior wall, there might be a window there. But once we saw that, we decided to take off the wood paneling that was on the wall and see potentially if there was a windowsill, and if not, to refinish the brick. Now the wood paneling that's on this wall is mushroom board. It's usually cypress or cedar, and they use it to grow mushrooms in, and then over time, because there's soil in the boards, the wood is eaten away a little bit, and it just leaves this really beautiful grain pattern. It's a pretty popular and somewhat prized type of lumber to get around me. So obviously all this is going to be saved, which is why you could see I'm pretty gingerly removing it from the wall. In some parts the material is rather thin, so I spent a lot of time trying to conserve all of the pieces. You can see behind the wall, my grandpa, like I said in the original video, put this up, and he painted the wall so that since it's mushroom board, there was going to be some seams and you wouldn't see a white wall. This was originally brown. It looks kind of purple in the photo. And we knew that that was a brick wall, like I said, because they put furring strips up to attach the wood to, and when you're screwing into a brick wall versus drywall, you know about it pretty quickly. So I also removed those. You could kind of see it in the bottom part of the frame. You could see it pretty well now. That is the investigation discovery hole that I created. The windowsills in the house are about 16 inches off the ground. So if there was a window in this back room, it would have been pretty much centered in the room and about 16 inches up. So I cut out that piece. There was no windowsill, and then we kind of crossed our fingers and removed the rest. If I had seen a windowsill, that would have been a non-starter for my mom, and the hole I created was small enough that I just could have covered everything back up. So after this, like I keep saying, I am not a mason, so I don't have a lot of tools. I don't do a lot of mason work. I do not want to spend a lot of money on stuff. So I have some cold chisels I'm using just to remove this plaster. This plaster was put onto the walls. It did not come in sheets. You can tell, I had a picture of it, but I can't seem to find it. You can tell it was because it conforms perfectly to the brick, and at some point they actually etched the brick in order for the plaster to adhere. So this looks like a painstaking process, but once you kind of got the hang of where to attack it with the chisel to get off the biggest chunks, you could see by the end it comes off pretty quickly, and the brick underneath looked really amazing. So it was just a matter of chiseling off all of this plaster. There were 2 spots where they had run electrical wires and plumbing, which is kind of a given with old houses, but it was still a bummer. That's the mess it left. This stuff is really heavy. You could see there's some metal lath there, some pieces they put. Now the original door jamb is pretty thick because this is older houses. They're going to be double brick. And my mom was not keen on also taking apart the jamb, so when she was out of the house one day when I was working in the shop and I knew she was out of the house, I went and removed those pieces, and it actually looked really cool. She was happy with it. Sometimes in this house it's a do the job and ask for forgiveness sort of situation. So then there's going to be plaster residue on your walls. I originally started with that wire cut brush. You can see that did a decent job, but it didn't remove all of it, and the process was pretty slow. So then you could see that's what the cut brush looks like on bottom. So then I went out and got a diamond grinding disc for the angle grinder. I think it was about $40. They sell one that's a little more expensive with an extra row of diamond bits, and that worked amazingly. It removed this material. I did this in about an afternoon, cleaned up the entire wall. Be forewarned that if you want to do something like this is easily the messiest job I've ever done, removing this plaster residue off the brick. The dust gets everywhere, even though I had the heating vent closed up, the door closed up with multiple layers of plaster. I had a fan venting outside. It still created so much dust. It was a constant source of contention throughout the process because I had to do quite a bit of grinding on this job. You could just see how much dust there is from the camera angle. In that it was unavoidable creating the dust, and my mom is a very clean person, which you might not guess from seeing my shop that I come from a clean environment, and it just got everywhere and there was really nothing I could do. But you can see that I'm holding the grinder pretty much perfectly parallel to the wall. This will leave some etching on the bricks. That's just the nature of the beast with a disc like this, but you really can't notice it unless you get super close to the wall. And like I said, it removes that material so quickly. Since this was an add-on job to the work I had, I'm doing a lot of this work on weekends and at nighttime, so unfortunately you could see the view gets a little dark at times just because I don't have great lighting in that back room. So this was one of the cubbies where they ran electrical wires. You could see them pushed out of the way on the side. I did not want to cut out all this brick and replace it. Like I said, this is an actual wall supporting up the house. So what I decided to do was to go through and create a recess kind of around where the wires were, and then I was going to fill it in with a piece of reclaimed lumber. Obviously anyone that is in construction or even woodworking will know that this was not an original piece of wood to the house, but because I'm leaving some of the beams exposed and because the header over the door will be exposed, it will match enough that it will fit in. It was an easy cover versus what was there. And not only is my mom a very clean person, she is a collector of things, and both of these patched places you'll never see in the house because they're both completely covered by furniture. So you can see I just went through with an actual cutting disc this time, a disc I got from Lowe's. The brand was Norton. They worked awesome for this job. I got a pack of 3 to do this, and I just went through and created that recess. This is the other bad spot. You could see they patched it just terribly, but they knew the wall was going to be covered up, so that's usually the quality of work you will see. And then at some point I noticed that there was this gold band buried in the wall. I took it out and posted a picture on Instagram. Someone said it was probably an older cigar ring. They used to be made of metal. So I'm doing the exact same thing here. For this, I'm following the jointed lines in the mortar and going through. That mess of brick will also come out. This is where they pulled the water lines from the back of the sink in the kitchen to go into the bathroom, which is to my right in the video, as well as run electric. And they really butchered up the brick. So I'm doing the exact same thing for this one, and this will also be covered by furniture. Just creating a series of curves with that angle grinder, moving slowly and removing a bunch of that brick. I went down about 1/2 of an inch in order to get that recess I needed. And then the wood I used is actually the old door jamb wood. I didn't film it. I planed it down in my shop and filled those recesses. So then above the door where the header is, this is a common place for there to be stress fractures in the mortar. I'm going to fill those. I went through and just removed the material. They make a specialty tool for this, but I just used a cold chisel so that I could go through and rejoint those parts. Another weird spot in the wall were these two pieces they capped. There used to be a chimney in my brother's room, which is above this, and there might have also been a stove in this back room at one point, some sort of older stove that uses wood or coal, and maybe this was a vent for it because there were these two pieces. And when I cut out this brick, because I'm capping it with a brick that my mom actually got when she was in Cape Cod, this hole went all the way up to my brother's room that he used to have, as well as down to the floor, and it was just filled with soot and dirt and these refractory bricks. I originally thought this would be an awesome place to put a hidey hole, but tons and tons of dirt just kept falling out from inside. There was no way it was going to work, so I just capped it back in. That's just kind of a little bit of a view of what was inside there. So then I was going to reset one of these bricks, and then I could perfectly fit the Cape Cod brick in there. That's just cleaning up the edges to make it square. So then once all those bricks were out, you could see the pipes in there, why they put such a big hole in here in order to run those pipes. So I knew the proper way to do this was to take the brick back to the joint so that you have a much more solid repair. I was kind of putting that off and potentially convincing myself not to do it because it was going to be a lot more work, but I finally decided to do it. So you could see I'm going to go through and piece out these pieces. If you have some sort of Hilti or something like that with a specialty bit, this work is pretty quick. Like I said, I'm still using chisels, so I painstakingly chiseled out those bricks on top and bottom, and now you can see I'll be able to get a much more solid connection by resetting those bricks into the piece. This is the wood I have. Like I said, I planed it down in my shop. I didn't film that. It only needed one little notch cut out of it in order to fit it in place, and now I could start setting the bricks on top of this. So this wood panel will pop out if you need it to. That's the patch for the other side. But it stays in place on its own, which is nice. I'm not a fan of burying wires like this. The fact that a water pipe and electrical was buried behind multiple layers of plaster and wooden board, and we didn't know about it. If something burst or fell apart, it would have just been a nightmare. So now you could pop those off and have access to all of the pipes. So then I went through and rejointed all these pieces. My big tip for this is make sure that the brick is wet. The brick is going to be extremely porous, and if it's not wet, it's going to pull all the moisture out of whatever you're jointing. The original brick was extremely white, and someone on Facebook said that that's probably because there was limestone in the original mortar, and that makes a lot of sense. I probably could have spent some time trying to find better mortar to match. This is just bagged mortar from Lowe's. That's going to turn out a little more gray than the white pieces, but like I said, the majority of this wall is going to be covered in knickknacks, and it was just so much easier to go buy a bag of pre-mixed mortar. So then once again, just filling in that brick up top, and then that patch is done as well. So in order to fill in this piece is actually going to be laying some bricks. Like I said, I'm not a mason, but I felt pretty confident in just fixing up these little pieces. I laid down my bed and then could slide the pieces into place. This turned out pretty well considering that the bricks were a little bit of sagging in one spot, but you could see I'm just going through, adding that mortar. Now because the bricks I'm using were a little bit different size than the ones in the house, you'll notice my joints are bigger than on the wall. But once again, since this is just a little patch spot, I did not bother cutting down little pieces of brick in order to make it match. This is now currently behind a couch as well. So that's just filling in, and eventually my camera battery does die, so I didn't get the complete repair, but you will see it in the video. So then I made sure to wash this really well with the scrub brush. There's going to be a ton of dust and residue on this wall. The product I used to coat this, because like I said, brick is very, very porous. If you don't coat it, it's going to shed a lot over time. I just found on Amazon it was one of the better rated products. I used the decking roller like I did for the ceiling to get in all the recesses. And you just want to make sure the wall's perfectly dry before you do this, or just like with wood finishes, you'll get a cloudy finish. I let this dry for about a week before I did this, and you're putting this on pretty liberally, and I'm applying 2 coats, but it's pretty self-explanatory. The directions actually recommend letting it drip down the wall like that so the brick can really absorb this. You can kind of see in the far right corner my patch job. Minus the mortar being the wrong color, I was pretty happy with how that turned out. And then this is just what it looks like after 2 coats of that finish, and before stuff started being moved back into the room.